it was about, or the fact that during this war, at a point when the United States is a very young nation and it's battling one of the most powerful empires on earth, that the fate of the country is really in question.
The war.
Now, did you see that cannonball that was lit? That's what I mean. They hit and then explode. That one did not in the powder magazine.
May be forgotten, but one piece of its legacy is a modern-day institution.
Our America, please rise for the national anthem. Welcome Grammy Award winner and soprano superstar Renee Fleming.
Oh, say, can you see?
Everyone's heard it. They may be moving their lips, but the number of Americans who really know the words is only 40%.
Isn't that
Fewer
crazy?
still know what the words mean.
People are shocked that they never thought about it before. They've heard this song their whole life, and yet they never stop to think about what it actually means.
Who's got stripes and bright stars?
Not every singer can pull it off.
Was so held at twilight
At the starlight, star.
that the stars were still there.
And the home of
The tune is so difficult that sometimes only a specialist can do it justice.
I practiced the national anthem more than I've practiced anything in a very long time. I also woke up in the middle of the night for weeks, worried about the text. When suddenly the moment arrives and you're a deer in the headlights, wait a minute, was it fight, plight?
Renee Fleming's 2014 rendition was a historic performance. The first time a classically trained singer has sung the anthem in 48 Super Bowls.
It's beyond anything I've ever experienced. I'm not used to singing in stadiums at all. I'm used to singing in concert halls and opera houses, much smaller audience. My gosh, talk about pressure. I only had 2 minutes, and it had to be perfect.
The range of the Star Spangled Banner is about an octave and a half, whereas most classical singers' vocal range is 2 octaves and more. When you hear a classically trained singer performing, you can tell that they're going to be fine at the end.
UCLA music professor Michael Dean is a national anthem vocal coach. He's the man that pop stars turn to avoid embarrassing themselves when they attempt the Star Spangled Banner. Today, he's working with a voice student.
So before we begin with the vocal part, let's start just with the text.
Sure.
So the first 2 phrases of the poem are,
Oh, say, can you see, by the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming?
right. Part of my job in training singers is helping them understand what it is that they're communicating and what it is they're saying. So there was a dangerous fight, and all the way through the dangerous fight, you could see it. Now, where could you see it? Well, that line tells us, or the ramparts, which are what?
Blockades.
They're blockades.
Very good,
that
Paris.
would be at a fort.
Right.
So now you know that the flag is flying over some kind of fort that has ramparts.
The author of the song was an accidental eyewitness to that perilous fight. Francis Scott Key has still got name recognition today. Key is an attorney and amateur poet at the outbreak of hostilities in 1812. Devoutly religious, he opposes the war on moral grounds.
This war, in many ways, was a fight over the future of the North American continent.
Britain was like America is today. It was the only superpower. And America was an upstart nation.
But Key will soon enter the nest of the enemy. When an assault that may destroy a city threatens America itself. This is the Star-Spangled Banner. It's the actual flag that inspired Francis Scott Key to write the song that became the national anthem. He watched as it was raised over a fort under attack. Now, millions of visitors see it every year at the Smithsonian. It's tattered, missing a star, and smaller than it once was.
It originally was 42 feet by 30 feet, and we have about 33 feet of the flag left.
Wear and tear did some of the work. And over the centuries, souvenir hunters reduced the flag's size by clipping off patriotic keepsakes.
The idea of souvenir tokens goes back to ancient times. People would take it upon themselves to cut out a little souvenir to take home with them.
No one will ever take a piece home again. The National Museum of American History spent 11 years conserving what they do have, thread by painstaking thread. Curator Jennifer Jones and conservator Suzanne Thomason Krause are the faces behind the flag. For the first time since the flag was sealed inside its chamber in 2008, the conservators are opening the doors to perform a full-scale examination. The spacesuits are appropriate. The flag chamber is a low-oxygen environment.
If there were a fire in the museum, this room would actually be the safest place.
Nothing combustible or electrical is allowed inside. They have to crank the table into position the old-fashioned way.
It should be almost there.
They are here to examine the flag, section by section.
Anything that was marked, there should be a key at the bottom that tells you what it was. Those are areas that might have had a mold infestation.
They want the banner to last as long as the ideals it represents.
This symbol has become the symbol of the United States. That's what people think of when they think of the United States. They think of our flag.
That wasn't always the case. The eagle, Lady Liberty, and George Washington inspired new Americans during and after the Revolution. The flag's identity wasn't forged until the War of 1812. Some call it the Second War of Independence. Yet again, America is David to Britain's Goliath.
Britain had 1,000 ships, America had 20.
It starts at sea with a series of disastrous naval battles. The fight moves to the Canadian border. British-backed Indian tribes consistently defeat American troops in the Northwest Territory. Then, the British occupy New Orleans.
We'll talk about all that later.
This war had gone badly for the Americans from the start.
2 years in, the odds get worse.
In 1814, Napoleon fell, and this was to free up thousands of additional troops for the war against America.
Nearly 30,000 British troops crossed the Atlantic and entered the Chesapeake Bay, just 60 miles from the American capital.
There had been fear early on that Washington would be invaded, and then when it wasn't, it sort of died away, and they all became a little complacent.
The Secretary of War was a man called John Armstrong, and he was one of those people who refused to believe the British would target Washington.
President Madison and Armstrong and Congress, they were very arrogant.
By the summer of 1814, the complacency runs so deep, specific intelligence is ignored.
There's an anonymous letter that arrives in Washington in August that the British intend to sail up the Patuxent and land a force that will take the capital. That warning was not heeded.
British troops march east from the bay, heading toward Washington, D.C. Most American troops are hundreds of miles away on the Canadian border. 6 miles from the capital, the Redcoats clash with battalions of U.S. Army regulars and local militia sent to defend Washington. For the first time, the Americans face a British weapon of terror. The Congreve rocket.
3, 2, 1, fire! At the time, it was pretty much a terror weapon.
Steve Jones researches and reproduces 19th century artillery. Attached to a long stick and propelled by black powder, the iron missiles could travel up to 2 miles.
The sound of these things was extremely loud. It didn't matter if you were in front of it, behind it, you were hearing it and seeing it come at you. The smoke trail, they just didn't know what it was.
Compared to artillery, they were lightweight and portable. But convenience came with a price.
All this is a giant bottle rocket. If you've ever held a bottle rocket and fired it and tried to hit a specific target, you'll have to fire 100 of them before you even get close to where you're aiming at. They went all over the place.
They were unpredictable, but could be brutally efficient, lighting deadly fires wherever they landed. In the Napoleonic War, 200 British Congreves set the town of Boulogne ablaze in 10 minutes. Outside of Washington, near the small town of Bladensburg, Maryland, the rockets make an impression on the American president.
James Madison was the first United States president to be on a battlefield and actually face incoming enemy fire.
Madison flees to safety, but the Americans prove hopelessly untrained. Despite outnumbering the British, U.S. forces suffer what has been called the greatest disgrace ever dealt to American arms. Their retreat is so hasty, the battle becomes known as the Bladensburg Races. And the route to the capital is clear.
Washington was a very important target psychologically. By evening, they're there at the entrance to the city.
The city is unguarded.
Combination of ignorance, arrogance, and just plain stupidity left Washington vulnerable.
In a state of confusion, citizens flee in terror.
You know, it's a non-Twitter war, so you don't really know where anybody is. They have an idea, but they're conflicting stories about where the troops are.
Inside the White House, First Lady Dolly Madison waits anxiously for her husband to return.
There wasn't enough time to really pull together a plan.
Realizing that the British invasion can't be stopped, the First Lady decides to evacuate. She collects what she can from the White House.
One of the pieces that she's determined to save is this magnificent portrait of George Washington done by Gilbert Stuart.
Dolly instructs the staff to save it or burn it. The painting must not fall into British hands.
She knew that this would be just an amazing blow to American morale.
But she was risking a far greater humiliation.
If she hadn't evacuated, they would have taken her prisoner, and she would have been put in a cage and paraded through London.
By the time the First Lady decamps, she is only 2 hours ahead of the British soldiers. A servant locks the door and leaves the White House to its fate. But for the vengeful British troops, the first target is the U.S. Capitol.
The United States Capitol was like the great cathedrals of medieval Europe. All the money and the best artisans had been employed to create it. In the young republic, it represented the hopes and aspirations of America. And of course, it's a symbol of democracy.
That makes it a prime target for the British. Before destroying it, their leader, George Cockburn, mocks what it stands for.
There's a story that Rear Admiral Cockburn enters the Senate chamber and stands up on the Speaker's chair and says to the troops with him,
"Shall we burn this harbor of American democracy? All those in favor say aye."
With the houses of Congress in flames, the troops forced their way into the White House.
They found a table laid for 40 because Johnny Madison had been expecting the military and the political leaders for dinner.
The invaders are only too happy to help themselves to the presidential feast.
Let's sit at this table and have dinner and enjoy our wonderful repast and toast the king, but then we'll burn the house.
They ransacked the White House and they burned it. All that was left was the shell.
In 1814, the British burned the White House. And the best examples of their presence is under the front door of the White House. You will see a massive stone archway, and grey stones have been charred charcoal black by the fire set by the British.
I know you've been over at the White House, so I thought you might like to see a piece in our collection that relates to that. This is a piece of the scorched timber from the White House.
This is as good as seeing the president.
Oh, well, this is a piece that came out of the house during the Truman renovation.
The White House, you can imagine this going up and all the splendid furniture. They could have taken Washington without burning, but they knew that this would strike at the morale of the country.
It's the final insult.
Washington is in ruins. 60 miles away, the citizens of Baltimore are filled with dread.
Okay, hit the lights, please. We'll finish this tomorrow. Harry Truman, when he was elected president in 1948, they completely renovated the White House. And so they found a lot of these remnants, but there still is witness to what happened there. When you get in the Capitol, you can see the burnt walls in certain areas. And so we'll get a chance to see some of that. So we're at 20:05. We'll start with this tomorrow, and then we'll continue on and tell you about the War of 1812. Everybody get their Pat Tillmans done, right? Anybody want to self-report they didn't? Certainly not. Isn't that something that only 40% of Americans know the words to the national anthem and a lot less know what it means? You do. You know what it means now, so you can be one of those people that knows it. It's kind of amazing to me that you could even fathom that. Want to make one more point to you? Take a look at the popular vote as of 7:05 Eastern Standard Time, day before, or I guess it was yesterday. Hillary Clinton actually has increased her lead to over 2 million popular votes ahead of President-elect Trump. I wonder how that'll end up. We're still counting them up, thinking about some recounts. Kind of interesting how that changes daily. So I think what we should do during the basketball season, I think this for a fundraiser for your DC trip next year, we will all get together and sing the national anthem at the ball game, and then we'll charge people to get out. What do you think? Yes. We have some singers in here, though. Did the voice coach there make sense to you, the guy that actually coaches these people? You better know the words first. That poor little gal you saw that was singing, she forgot the words. But the head basketball coach of the Philadelphia 76ers felt so bad, he actually went up and sang the rest with her. Maurice Cheeks did. That's a couple of those.
remember it happened in W. One girl was singing it. You remember that? Singing it.
Yeah, there's like this girl in
Okay, everybody was here today? No, Garza.
Deport me now.
See you guys later. Not sure I turned that off.